example, I want to collect customer data, right? In collecting customer data, I might choose to say I want to get their first name. I also want to get maybe their last name. All right. Maybe I want to get their gender. And let's say age. All right. We're just going to break it down to basics, nothing complex, so that we get at the very foundational level, we can understand the concept. So if this is where I want to save this data, for example, all right. If this is it, I want at every point in time, even if it's a toddler should not have, or a toddler should not have the ability to just, or the freedom to put in numbers here. Okay. I want at every point in time within this cell, someone should impute a text for me. All right. This must be James. Even for the last name, I want someone to say John. I also do not want to accept anything less than, maybe for example, here I want to ensure that James, here also John. Then for gender, I do not want people to even type it in full. I just want them to either put an M, which indicates they are male, or F, which indicates they are female. All right? I don't want them to type it completely. So I want to restrict the length, right? And say for age, I do not want them to be less than a particular age. Maybe I don't want them to be less than 18. So when filling out this form, if you're less than 18, this should also throw you out. All right? So some of the constraints we have is for name, it must be what? It must be text. Okay. For gender, just a character. One character to represent the gender. For age, greater than 18. So far, we've been able to build up some very basic constraints for our data. All right? So how do we go about this? Other things we might want to also include is if somebody imputes wrong data, right? If somebody should impute wrong data, what should it throw? Should it throw an error? Should we just give him an information to direct him? Information on what to do? And so on and so forth. These are things we explore. We can also choose to add, maybe we want a list. Let's say what time of the day did the person, or we can give it status. So I can come here and say status. All right. For status, in this case, we can come up with a list. All right. Status. For status, we can come up with a list and say maybe contacted or not contacted. Or maybe wrong number. All right. So this is a list, and we've restricted the status to just 3 conditions. So the person can either be contacted, not contacted, or maybe a wrong number. Okay. So basically, these are constraints we've established for this data collection exercise. So how do we implement it? In order to do this, for example, I can come here and say, okay, for the entire column here for first name, right? I can choose to also extend it to last name because I might want to have the same constraints for first name and last name. Once you highlight the area you want, this is basically a data operation. And from the beginner class, we know we've already established that this is basically where all our tools are, all the functions and functionalities. So the particular operation we're trying to do now is a data operation, and it's only logical we go to the data tab. So you click on the data tab, right? Once you click on the data tab, There are various tools, but the particular tool we need sits where? Here, where we have the data tools. Okay, we have the data tools here. So where we have data tools, if you look closely, we have text to column, which you've used before. We have remove duplicates. You've also explored this. We have so many others. But right here, when you hover on it, it says what? Data validation. So what does it say? Pick from a list of rules to limit the type of data that can be entered in a cell. Right? For example, you can provide a list of values like 1, 2, 3, or only numbers greater than 1,000 as valid. So we click this drop down. The first option we have is what? Data validation. And then I click data validation. Once you click data validation, this window pops out. We have a fresh window on the screen, data validation window. We have settings, we have input message tab, and we have error alert, right? And we're going to explore all of this. First, settings. Currently, all these cells allow any value. If you look at it, what does it say? Allow any value. But if I click the drop down, then I can specify what kind of value will be the input here, correct? So I have whole number, I have decimal, I have list, I have date, I have time, I have text, right? And this text is talking about what? Text length. Okay, so if I'm considering text, and maybe I also want to control the size of the text, then I can choose what? Text length. And say, for example, I do not want anybody to come and give names that are less than a particular text. So I don't want anyone to come and abbreviate their names and all of those things. So what I can do here, I can say text. Okay. And it says ignore blank. So if I want it required, you know, when you're filling Google Forms, you see those forms that have asterisks, red asterisk, and they say it's a required field, right? That means you must fill it. So if I don't want it blank, I'm going to what? Uncheck ignore blank. But if I can entertain a blank, I will leave it checked, right? So now it's asking me between what? So I can specify. I want the constraint here to be that the character will be between 2 and maybe 10. Anybody that has more than 10 characters in their name, it's going to throw an error. But I can also change the condition in this case, where you have data in between. So I can hit this drop down and say maybe not between, or any of the logical conditions that make sense. Equal to, if I have a fixed or definite number, not equal to, greater than, less than, and so on and so forth. So here, if I say less than, for instance, and I say it should not be less than 2, right? That means the character must be more than 2. Or if I say should not be less than 1 character. So at least, even if your name is Ba, you need to put what? BA. Then I come here and I say input message. This input message shows input message when cell is selected. Do I want to inform the user or whoever is imputing data on what data should be added? I can choose to do that. So here I can maybe call the title here info. And then I say enter full names. All right. Enter full names. So that will be my message. What if there is an error? It says shows error alert after invalid data is entered. When user enters invalid data, show this error alert. So it's either I choose a stop, warning, or information. We're going to explore this. For example, if I choose warning in this case, I can also say, call this info. Maybe I'll just call this a warning info. And I say, please enter correct data. Okay, and I hit enter. So you can see once I come into the cell, it's telling me info, enter full names. All right, here to info, enter full names. So I can say maybe my name Kamal. All right, please enter. So it's now showing me a warning. Is it correct? I say yes, continue, and that's fine. What if I come here and I say A? Please enter correct data. Continue. You say yes, right? But I think there's also something. All right, so let's take this out. I think there's something with our constraints. So let's highlight the constraint again to be sure. Data validation, settings, text length, less than 1. It's meant to be greater than 1. And I say, okay. So if I say Kamal enters without issues, or if I say D, you choose an error, right? So for a warning, it will only prompt you that this is not meant to be the correct data. So if I say yes, I am forcing the data in, right, for warning. However, we can choose not to take that entry, okay? So now name enters, I can choose to say John, right? Because I have, okay, so we still have the existing constraint there. So I need to go back there and ensure that it's greater than, not less than. So greater than 1, and okay. So here, if I say John, everything is fine, okay? But what if I put the wrong entry and I don't want it to accept? I still go back to my data validation. Then I go to my error alert. This time around, I will not choose a warning. I would rather choose what? Stop. Say, okay. So the moment I put J, for instance, it says what? Please enter correct data, and I'll have to retry. So here I need to what? Type in the correct data. Okay. So now we are controlling inputs. On a normal cell, I can type anything with numbers and it will accept it. But with data validation, we can begin to control inputs on our sheets. And the goal basically is to what? Help us with our data cleaning. Right? It's going to help us in managing our time, even the efforts, and of course, control the input of the users.